Vampires, werewolves, and monsters. Oh my. You're listening to Study, Grow, Know with Dr. Fred.
Welcome to Study, Grow, Know, where we discuss theology, prophecy, and current political issues from a conservative biblical perspective. Here's your host, Dr. Fred DeRuvo.
You know, it's been impossible to miss the fact that within society today, vampires have become a very real subject to many. And by that I mean that the vampire phenomenon has taken literally the world by storm. It truly seems that people can't get enough. And some of the most recent visions of these entities proves that fact. Twilight is a case in point. The vampire story began on the small screen and quickly segued to the silver screen. Created by Stephanie Meyer, the story is about an unorthodox vampire who meets the girl he believes to be his soulmate. And here's a quote. Bella Swan has always been a little bit different. Never one to run with the crowd, Bella never cared about fitting in with the trendy plastic girls at her Phoenix, Arizona high school. When her mother remarried and Bella chose to live with her father in the rainy little town of Forks, Washington, she didn't expect much of anything to change. But things do change when she meets the mysterious and dazzlingly beautiful Edward Cullen. For Edward is nothing like any boy she's ever met. He's nothing like anyone she's ever met, period. He's intelligent and witty, and he seems to see straight into her soul. In no time at all, they're swept up in a passionate and decidedly unorthodox romance. Unorthodox because Edward really isn't like the other boys. He can run faster than a mountain lion. He can stop a moving car with his bare hands. Oh, and he hasn't aged since 1918. Like all vampires, he's immortal. That's right, vampire. But he doesn't have fangs. That's just in the movies. He doesn't drink human blood, though Edward and his family are unique among vampires in that lifestyle choice. Unquote. You know, vampires have come a long way since I was a kid. In fact, by the time I was old enough to watch movies and understand them, the classic monsters of Universal Studios have already been on the film for over 30 years, yet they were making a comeback to my generation of kids who had become interested in monsters like Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein, and all the rest. However, it should be noted that these classic monsters were mild compared to the monsters of today. Then they were obviously evil, no questions asked. Since then, they have literally morphed into much more than monster and something far closer to being a type of god. Lines between good and evil have evaporated. The vampires, lycanthropes, and other monsters of today are far more powerful, much more attractive, and seemingly unstoppable than were the monsters of yesteryear. Now, you know, Lon Chaney's Wolfman, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, and Bela Lugosi's Dracula, they were all scary. They also had very clear limitations. The one major thing that separated the monsters of that era from those of today is the supernatural connection. While we knew that changing from a human bat was supernatural, it was not dwelt on, nor was it glorified. Today's monsters are also supernatural, and that connection is glorified. In fact, the supernatural connection has become the primary focus in most of these envisionings. The Twilight franchise is just simply a case in point. Now, apparently the creator of the series, Stephanie Meyer, as mentioned, is Mormon and sees a direct connect between vampires, their desire for blood, and Christianity. She recalls how she came up with the concept of Twilight. Quote, I woke up on that June 2nd from a very vivid dream. In my dream, two people were having an intense conversation in a meadow in the woods. One of these people was just your average girl. The other person was fantastically beautiful, sparkly, and a vampire. They were discussing the difficulties inherent in the facts that A, they were falling in love with each other, while B, the vampire was particularly attracted to the scent of her blood and was having a difficult time restraining himself from killing her immediately. Unquote. Now, Meyer has been written about in Time magazine as well as in other magazines and internet articles. Overnight, she has become another J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame, and she states, quote, in the course of 6 months, Twilight was dreamed, written, and accepted for publication, unquote. You know, I've always thought it odd that Harry Potter became an obsession literally overnight. Both Meyer and J.K. Rowling came out of nowhere and both became instant celebrities as their books became available for purchase. And the question is why? The most interesting thing to me is that both deal with the supernatural, and neither woman considered herself to be much of a writer, yet both managed to create characters and stories that have sold millions of books, and their franchises have taken in millions of dollars from TV and or movies. How does that happen? Well, in my opinion, it happens when the enemy of our souls gets behind it. This is not to say that either one of these women are possessed. I'm not saying that. I'm not implying that. It's also not to say that there is necessarily anything wrong with being successful. What is certainly strange, though, is how these women went from nobodies one day to known celebrities the next, and all because of their created stories in which the supernatural plays a huge part. Meyer, a Mormon homemaker, went from a normal life to superstar because of one vivid dream she experienced, which was related to vampires. This happened literally overnight in the space of 6 months. Rowling's story is even more interesting, going from living on welfare to authoring arguably one of the most sought-after characters in the 21st century, which made her a multimillionaire in the space of 5 years, and now she's worth nearly $800 million. These are not accidents, folks. These are planned by forces which are working to bring about their own purposes throughout the world. Have you ever wondered how a woman on welfare could write so many books? And again, this is not to say that Rowling is possessed or, for that matter, is an idiot, because there are many reasons that people go on welfare, and not all of them are about adopting a lifestyle of taking what you haven't earned. However, if you consider how prolific Rowling must be to write the number and size of books she has written about Harry Potter, this, in my mind, is abnormal and requires help from beyond. Since Meyer attributes her book's story and characters to the dream she had, one would almost say the same thing about her, especially given her connections with what most of us believe to be a cult, Mormonism. So what's going on here? It seems clear enough that Nephilim demons and fallen angels are working overtime to ensure that the world has become desensitized to the supernatural. There's a blending, a mixing. The line between the two is being muddied. It's being evaporated. The goal is to make people think that the supernatural, as seen in franchises like Harry Potter and Twilight, is perfectly normal and acceptable. Would it be considered weird if kids could actually use the spells they hear about and see on the silver screen in real life? Well, not only would it not be considered weird, but also in reality, I almost think that kids are disappointed because they cannot at this time authentically do the things that Potter and his friends do in the movies. The characters in the Potter films are in every respect ordinary kids. They have their problems, their doubts, their frustrations, and in short, they have loads of growing pains. Kids can do and relate to these characters. But who among us would not want to be able to cast a spell on the school bullies so that he stops bothering you? Many of us have thought about doing that. Who would not like to turn someone into a toad? Who would not like to be able to ride a real broom across the sky? Of course, movie franchises like these are not complete without companies who create licensed collectibles for kids and adults to spend money on so that they can recreate scenes from these movies, especially during Halloween, right? Warner Brothers, the Noble Collection, and other companies are producing a growing line of collectibles to suit everyone's needs. Some of the magic wands light up, as seen in the illustrations that I have in my book, to give a more realistic effect when casting a spell. The fact that these movies are doing so well throughout the world says a great deal. Here's an interesting quote. As on November 27th, 2009, New Moon, that's the Twilight series, has taken in $338,174 worldwide, and it already holds the record for the number one yearly opening weekend in 2009. The number one opening day gross, the number one single day gross, the number one single day Friday gross, the number one opening weekend in November, the number one opening weekend on a holiday, the number one widest independent releases, the number one widest opening independent releases, and the fastest to $100 million, unquote. Now, that's a lot. That's impressive. It appears as though people cannot get enough of these types of movies, even buying up items like for instance, a USB drive with 2 gigs of storage space, complete with the vampire logo used in the movie. There is something dangerously wrong, though, when people clamor after these types of movies and artifacts and props as if they're the real thing. People seemingly are finding it more difficult to separate fact from fiction because the forces of darkness have increasingly sought to blend the two together into one. They've been blurring the line of demarcation until it becomes virtually non-existent. One of the things that has brought about this more than ever is the area of digital special effects. Now, years ago, effects were obvious, weren't they? Not so today. It is at times difficult to tell when reality stops and digital effects begin. This one area of filmmaking has set the stage for many of the illusions that may come into place when the Antichrist steps onto the world scene. You know, this was not the case years ago. Even Dark Shadows, a daytime soap, which also made it to the big screen. And I'm talking about the Dark Shadows done years ago, not the most recent one with Johnny Depp. But this one was years ago because it was such a hit as a soap opera, they made a movie out of it. Though it was scary, but it was clearly fantasy. However, everything that has come before Twilight and Harry Potter were just precursors and stepping stones to bring us to the reality where we are now. I mean, consider the fact that over the past decade, many of the movies that have been produced have ventured into the supernatural, and over time, the reality of the supernatural portrayed in these movies has been stepped up until everything on the screen seems real and therefore very possible. This is due also to the advance of the aforementioned special effects industry. Because of increased technology, special effects can now be produced in post-production, meaning after everything has been filmed. Effects are created in programs like Adobe's After Effects, and they merge with the actual film without a glitch. Most people cannot tell the difference between when a person is acting out a scene and where the acting stops and the special effects take over. For instance, in the movie Batman Begins, there are a number of scenes that were created completely by special effects. This becomes obvious in the scenes where actor Christian Bale is gracefully flying over Gotham City. However, special effects were also used during scenes where Bale's Batman would drop off a stairway onto the floor 2 or 3 stories below, and all of a sudden he would be encircled by bats. Now, while it might have been obvious to the viewer that the bats were created in post-production, what is probably not obvious is the fact that the entire scene was created in special effects, including Bale's Batman as he jumped from the stairway to the floor. The camera simply filmed the empty stage with the stairway, floor, and walls in place. Later, in post-production, all the elements were added. Who knew? How would anyone be able to tell? Since the late 1990s, the reality and creativity of many vampire and werewolf-related movies has been ramped up. The Blade trilogy, starring Wesley Snipes, where his character, a half-breed human and vampire, goes on the hunt for other vampires to rid them from the face of the earth. The trilogy brought in millions. Buffy the Vampire Slayer started out as a movie and then went to the small screen as a TV series. With a bit of tongue-in-cheek, the main character, Buffy, learns that she must hunt down and destroy vampires. The movie, released in 1992, gave birth to the TV series, which aired from 1997 to 2003. And many of the characters in this series, as weird as they looked, were accepted as normal. Even one particular character who looked like the devil incarnate, complete with horns coming out of his head. The character was affable, quirky, and very intelligent. All of these movies, TV series, comic books, graphic novels have made vampirism a household word. It has become normal to believe in the supernatural. None of this has been by accident. It's all been planned. However, lest we give Satan and his minions too much credit, it must be observed that all of this has transpired under God's watchful eye. All of these things have come to the fore because God, in his infinite wisdom, has allowed them to do so because they direct the earth to his preordained plan. The bottom line is that because of the increased interest in the supernatural, vampire, lycanthrope, Harry Potter trend, Twilight, people are being programmed to accept this type of supernatural as normal. And because of that, when they see someone who will actually do miracles, they'll believe it's normal. The Bible says that the Antichrist will come onto the scene and will eventually deceive because he is able to perform miraculous things, and everyone will see them throughout the world and will marvel. And you can read about that in Revelation 13, 3 through 7 and 11 through 15. It's going to happen, and it is happening. And folks, that's our show for today. Satan is on the move. He's doing a lot to undermine what God is trying to do, but God will be the victor, of course. Well, until next time, I pray that God will open your eyes to show you how richly blessed you are indeed.
You've been listening to Study, Grow, Know with Dr. Fred DeRuvo. Please join us each week for new broadcasts that deal with theology, prophecy, and political issues from a biblical, conservative perspective.